Picture a world where secrets hold the power to change history, where shadowy figures move silently behind the scenes, their actions hidden from public view, yet shaping the course of nations. These are the spies, the double agents, the clandestine operatives whose missions remain shrouded in mystery long after they've vanished into the shadows. Today, we're stepping into that hidden realm to explore 25 of the most perplexing unsolved cases of historical espionage, stories so intriguing that even decades later, historians and intelligence experts continue to search for answers. Imagine the tension of a coded message intercepted but never fully deciphered, or the enigmatic disappearance of an agent who simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions. These aren't just tales from fiction, they're real-life puzzles that have baffled investigators for generations. From Cold War betrayals that tipped the balance of power to wartime deceptions that saved or cost thousands of lives, each case draws us deeper into a world where nothing is quite as it seems, and trust is the most dangerous commodity of all. What makes these mysteries so compelling isn't just the thrill of the unknown, but the very human stories at their heart. The courage, the ambition, the fear, and sometimes the tragedy. As we unravel each twist and turn, you'll find yourself not just observing history, but feeling it, questioning motives, weighing possibilities, and maybe even seeing the world a little differently by the end. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey through some of history's greatest unsolved espionage enigmas, where every clue leads to deeper intrigue and every answer only reveals more questions. Our journey into the shadows of history begins not in a dimly lit alleyway, but in a telegraph office with a message that would dramatically alter the course of the 20th century. In January 1917, amidst the carnage of the First World War, British cryptanalysts at Room 40, their secret intelligence unit, intercepted a secret diplomatic cable from German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann. The message was intended for the German ambassador in Mexico, but its contents were so explosive that its interception would ultimately help pull the United States out of neutrality and into the global conflict. The decrypted telegram proposed a stunning military alliance. If the United States entered the war against Germany, Mexico was to be invited to join the Central Powers. In return, Germany promised to support Mexico in reconquering its lost territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was a bold, desperate gambit, a plan to open a second front on America's doorstep and keep its forces occupied at home. When the contents were revealed to American President Woodrow Wilson, public opinion, already simmering due to German submarine warfare, boiled over. The Zimmermann telegram became a pivotal catalyst for America's declaration of war just a few months later. Yet, beneath this well-known narrative lies a deep and enduring mystery that continues to intrigue historians. The official story credits British intelligence with the decryption, but questions persist about who actually broke the code first. Some evidence suggests that American codebreakers working for a private cable company may have actually seen and partially decoded the message even before it reached the British. Were their findings suppressed or simply overlooked in the complex intelligence dance between allies? This raises the profound possibility that the timeline we accept is incomplete, a carefully constructed version of events designed to maximize the telegram's political impact. Furthermore, the role of British intelligence itself is shrouded in intrigue. To protect their supreme intelligence asset, the fact that they had broken German codes, the British had to invent a convincing cover story for how they obtained the decrypted text. They went to elaborate lengths, even secretly acquiring a copy of the encoded message from a telegraph office in Mexico City to make it appear as if it had been stolen there rather than decrypted in London. This masterful deception worked perfectly, but it forces us to wonder, what else did they manipulate? Were parts of the message edited or emphasized to make the proposal seem even more menacing to American eyes? The possibility exists that we have never seen the telegram exactly as Zimmerman sent it, but rather a version tailored to provoke a specific reaction. This single case opens a Pandora's box of wider uncertainties. The Zimmerman telegram is famous because it was discovered, but it almost certainly wasn't unique. It represents one secret communication that we know about. How many other similar proposals, alliances, or clandestine deals were discussed via coded messages that were never intercepted, or that were decrypted but remain locked away in classified archives to this day? The telegram is a testament to the fact that the history we know is often just the visible fraction of a much larger, hidden world of secrets and lies, a world where one decrypted message can change the fate of millions. While the breaking of the German Enigma code by Allied cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park is rightly celebrated as a monumental intelligence victory, this very success has cast a long shadow over a series of deeper, unresolved mysteries. We know they cracked countless messages, but the more tantalizing question is, what did they miss? The sheer volume of Enigma traffic was so immense that it was physically impossible for every single transmission to be decrypted in real time. Analysts had to prioritize, focusing on messages deemed most critical to immediate military operations. This means there exists an entire universe of German communications potentially containing discussions of war crimes, hidden scientific research, or even entirely separate spy networks that remain encrypted to this day simply because they were never deemed urgent enough to decode. These lost messages are a permanent black hole in our historical record, a silent testament to the overwhelming flood of secrets generated by the war. Another persistent enigma surrounds German suspicion, or the apparent lack thereof. The official history maintains that the German High Command, particularly the Navy, had unwavering faith in the machine's invulnerability. But was this confidence truly so absolute? Scattered evidence suggests occasional flickers of doubt. There were investigations into potential leaks, and some commanders expressed unease about certain operational security practices. The mystery lies in whether these concerns ever truly coalesced into a credible belief that Enigma was broken, and if so, why such a belief was so readily dismissed. Was it institutional arrogance, a failure of imagination, or could it have been a deliberate Allied disinformation campaign, perhaps using turned agents to convincingly explain away coincidences that might have otherwise revealed the breach? The possibility that the Germans came closer to discovering the truth than we've been led to believe adds a fascinating layer of tension to the entire narrative. Perhaps the most profound unknown is what these undercoded messages could still reveal. Every so often, modern researchers and amateur cryptographers, armed with computing power unimaginable in the 1940s, attempt to crack remaining Enigma messages from archived intercepts. What if one of these messages finally surrenders its secrets and reveals a plot we knew nothing about? It could be evidence of a high-level mole within the Allied command, the location of a lost treasure or art loot, or details of a clandestine meeting that changes our understanding of a key battle. Each undercoded transmission is a locked box that could fundamentally rewrite a paragraph, a page, or even a chapter of World War II history. The breaking of Enigma wasn't just a singular event, it's an ongoing story, and its final secrets may still be waiting to be told. The world of the Cambridge Five isn't just a story of 5 traitors. It's a sprawling mystery where the known betrayals might only be the tip of the iceberg. We know the famous names Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross. Their collective treachery, feeding secrets to Moscow for decades, represents one of the most damaging espionage breaches in history. But the most haunting question isn't about what they did, it's about who else was involved. Intelligence historians and former MI5 officers have long speculated that the 5 was never a precise number, but rather a convenient label for a much wider, more deeply embedded network. The original KGB defector who revealed the ring's existence spoke of 5 or maybe more, a crucial ambiguity that suggests other individuals, perhaps never identified, were also passing secrets from within the heart of the British establishment. Consider the sheer volume and variety of the secrets that were stolen. The 5 men held positions across the intelligence services, the Foreign Office, and even the royal household. They had access to everything from ultra-decrypts and nuclear weapons research to the private conversations of prime ministers. Yet, when we piece together their careers and movements, there are periods where the intelligence seemingly flowing to Moscow appears to exceed what these 5 men, acting alone, could have physically accessed and copied. This has led to a compelling theory that there were additional facilitators, couriers, or even full-fledged agents who acted as sources of convenience, providing logistical support or accessing documents from different departments, their identities protected by the sheer brilliance of the core group's camouflage. What secrets did they take to their graves? This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the case. With all the principal members now deceased, an entire library of clandestine knowledge has been permanently lost. We will likely never know the full list of operations they compromised, the names of every foreign agent they betrayed to their Soviet handlers, or the complete extent of the political and diplomatic manipulations they engineered from the shadows. Kim Philby, in particular, was a master of holding back information, even in his later life confessions in Moscow. He reveled in knowing that he was taking the full scope of his achievements to the grave. Every answered question about the 5 seems to generate 2 new ones, a testament to the meticulous tradecraft that kept so much of their work hidden. This leads to the unsettling possibility that some of the most sensitive details remain locked in classified files, not in Russian archives but in British and American vaults. The official investigations into the ring were, by necessity, deeply secretive. To publicly reveal the full extent of the damage would have been to admit to catastrophic failures in national security, potentially destabilizing governments and shattering alliances. It is highly probable that even today, certain documents pertaining to the 5 are withheld under the Official Secrets Act, not to protect the reputation of the traitors, but to shield the state from the profound embarrassment of revealing just how thoroughly it was penetrated. The true history of the Cambridge 5 may be a story that no government is ever willing to tell in full. And if this one ring was so successful, operating with impunity for so long, it forces a much darker and broader question: were they unique, or were they simply the one ring that was caught? The ideological appeal of communism among intellectuals in the 1930s and 40s was potent and widespread across Europe and America. It is not just possible but likely that the KGB ran other parallel rings at other elite universities or within other branches of government that were either never discovered or were so expertly handled that their existence has left no trace in the historical record. The shadow of the Cambridge 5 stretches far beyond their individual actions, casting a permanent doubt on the integrity of our historical narrative and leaving us to wonder how many other ghosts still walk the corridors of power, their stories forever untold. Moving from the high society betrayals of Cambridge, we enter a different kind of espionage puzzle, one built not on personalities but on fragments of text and unbreakable code names. In the closing days of World War II, as Allied victory seemed certain, American intelligence began a secret project that would continue in absolute silence for decades. Code-named Venona, its mission was to analyze and decrypt the enormous volume of encrypted diplomatic cable traffic between Soviet intelligence centers and their offices in the West. What they found was not just confirmation of a spy network, but a staggering revelation of its sheer size and audacity. For years, a small, dedicated team of cryptanalysts, linguists, and mathematicians painstakingly worked to peel back the layers of sophisticated Soviet encryption. Their successes were monumental. They uncovered evidence of atomic espionage that led to the Rosenbergs, confirmed the treachery of agents like Alger Hiss, and exposed numerous Soviet spy rings. But for every codename they successfully linked to a real person, there were dozens, even hundreds, that remained stubbornly anonymous. These unresolved identities, known only by their cryptic Soviet cover names, represent one of the Cold War's most enduring and troubling mysteries. Who were these ghost agents? The list of codenames is long and haunting: Quantum, Godsent, Pers, Ailes. Each one represents a person who, at a critical moment in history, was passing sensitive information to a foreign power. Some were undoubtedly low-level sources, but the quality of intelligence discussed under certain pseudonyms suggests that many held significant positions within the U.S. government, the State Department, the intelligence community, and even the White House. The real terror of Venona isn't the spies they caught. It's the ones they never identified, the ghosts in the machine of American power. This leads us to a deeply unsettling possibility. What if some of these unidentified agents didn't just fade away after the war? What if, instead of being exposed, they continued their careers, their secret loyalties undetected, and steadily rose through the ranks of influence? It is a chilling thought that a senior policy advisor, a respected senator, or even a high-ranking member of the intelligence community during the most tense periods of the Cold War could have been, in reality, a Soviet asset whose Venona codename was never broken. Their hidden influence could have subtly shaped foreign policy, swayed crucial debates, or leaked game-changing secrets, all while operating under a cloak of impeccable patriotism. The impact of these unknowns forces us to re-examine certain historical events through a new, more paranoid lens. Were some of the Cold War's most perplexing intelligence failures or sudden Soviet advantages not the result of luck or skill, but because of a hidden hand guiding events from within? The Venona decrypts are a permanent testament to a reality we can only partially see. We know the espionage happened, we have the conversations about it, but we are forever missing the full cast of characters. This incomplete picture means our understanding of 20th century history is itself incomplete, built on a foundation where key players remain hidden in the shadows, their true roles and impact lost to time. The known spy rings that targeted the Manhattan Project, like the one involving Julius Rosenberg, are terrifying enough. But what if they were merely the ones who got caught? The sheer scale of the Soviet intelligence effort in America suggests a far more frightening reality: that there were almost certainly other networks, other agents, who operated with such flawless tradecraft that they vanished into history without a trace, their secrets and their identities forever lost to the counterintelligence agencies hunting them. Consider the motivation and the opportunity. The Soviet Union viewed the atomic bomb not just as a weapon, but as the key to survival in the post-war world. They would have thrown every possible resource at stealing its secrets, not relying on a single, fragile network. It is a near statistical certainty that multiple parallel espionage cells were activated, operating in complete isolation from one another. This way, if one was rolled up by the FBI, the others would remain secure and productive. The existence of these lost rings is not just speculation. It's a logical conclusion based on how intelligence operations of that magnitude are run. The real mystery isn't if they existed, but how many, and just how much they managed to steal without ever alerting suspicion. This leads us to the most unsettling question of all: what did they take that we never knew was missing? We can measure the damage from the spies we uncovered, like the technical schematics provided by Klaus Futsch, but the secrets stolen by an unknown, undetected agent are a void in our historical understanding. It could have been a crucial insight into plutonium purification, a key element of the triggering mechanism, or data from early weapons effects tests. The Soviet atomic program advanced with startling speed, and while known espionage contributed greatly, it's possible that the final, critical puzzle piece was delivered by a source whose codename we've never even seen. The truly haunting possibility is that these phantom agents didn't retire after the war. The Cold War demanded a new kind of secret, not just blueprints for bombs, but plans for geopolitics. An agent who had successfully penetrated the atomic program would have been a prized asset, likely encouraged to continue their career advancement. Imagine a mid-level bureaucrat in 1945 who had passed secrets without detection. By 1960, that same individual could have risen to a position of significant influence within the State Department, the CIA, or the Pentagon. Their access would have shifted from nuclear physics to war plans, diplomatic cables, and lists of American agents operating behind the Iron Curtain. This notion forces a sobering re-evaluation of certain Cold War events. Unexplained intelligence failures, seemingly prescient Soviet moves during crises like the Berlin blockade or the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the tragic compromise of agent networks in Eastern Europe. Could some of these disasters be attributed not to bad luck or superior Soviet analysis, but to a hidden mole planted years earlier during the atomic rush, who had quietly climbed to a position? They could see everything. Their greatest achievement wouldn't be a single stolen document, but a lifelong, undetected career of subtle influence and betrayal, shaping events from within the very system they were secretly working against. The most perfect espionage is the kind that leaves no history to be written. Shifting from the shadowy networks of the 20th century, we travel back to the very birth of a nation and a mystery woven into America's founding fabric. Her name, or rather her code name, was Agent 355. In the cryptic numerical code of the Culper spy ring, the number 355 signified a lady, but this was no ordinary woman. She was a pivotal member of the most successful American intelligence operation of the Revolutionary War, a ghost in the history books whose true identity has been debated for over 2 centuries. The Culper ring, masterminded by George Washington himself, operated in British-occupied New York, a nest of loyalist sympathizers and redcoat officers. Their mission was to gather crucial information on troop movements, supply lines, and British plans, then relay this intelligence through a dangerous chain of couriers to the desperate Continental Army. The ring's leader, Abraham Woodhull, reported to his spymaster about a valuable source within the city, a woman with access to the highest levels of British society. She provided what Washington himself called useful intelligence, and her information was so trusted that it helped uncover one of the war's most shocking betrayals: the treason of General Benedict Arnold and the planned surrender of the key fort at West Point to the British. Yet for all her impact, we know virtually nothing about her. The genius of the Culper ring's tradecraft was its secrecy. Real names were never used in communications. This protection, so vital during the war, has forever obscured her identity. The mystery of Agent 355 is a historical detective story with a missing main character. Who was this woman who moved so easily among the enemy? The most popular theory paints her as a socialite, a wealthy and well-connected dame who charmed secrets out of besotted British officers at glittering parties. In this scenario, her weapon was not a dagger but her wit and social grace, her battlefield the ballroom. But another compelling theory suggests she was the opposite, not a lady of high society but a servant within it. A maid or a cook in a prominent loyalist household would be practically invisible to the officers who dined and plotted there, able to overhear confidential conversations and rifle through discarded documents without raising an eyebrow. This version of 355 is perhaps even more intriguing, a woman using her perceived insignificance as the perfect camouflage for espionage. The list of suspects is as varied as it is fascinating. Some historians have pointed to Anna Strong, a member of the ring who used laundry on a clothesline to signal to couriers, though her role seems more logistical than that of a high-level source. Others propose the captivating Peggy Shippen, the young wife of Benedict Arnold, who was known to have loyalist sympathies and moved in those exact circles. Yet, if she was 355, it would create a breathtaking paradox. a spy who helped uncover a treasonous plot that her own husband was at the center of. There are even suggestions she could have been a Quaker woman or a previously unknown camp follower, someone whose presence would never be questioned. Perhaps the most tragic layer to this mystery is her potential fate. There are accounts, though unconfirmed, of a woman being captured and dying aboard the notorious British prison ship, the HMS Jersey. If true, it adds a profound depth of sacrifice to her story, a patriot who gave not just her secrets but ultimately her life for the cause of liberty, only to be erased from the record by the very secrecy that kept her safe. The enduring power of Agent 355's story lies in this perfect storm of impact and anonymity. We know she existed. We know she made a difference at a critical juncture. But her name, her face, and her motivations are a blank canvas. This allows her to represent every unsung hero of the revolution, every person who took an immense risk for an ideal without any promise of recognition or glory. She is a reminder that history is not just made by the famous generals who commanded the armies, but also by the nameless, courageous individuals who moved silently in the shadows, shaping the world we live in today without leaving a trace. Leaping forward from the shadow wars of the 20th century, we now travel back millennia to the very origins of secret communication, where empires were built not just on the strength of their armies, but on the impenetrability of their codes. Long before supercomputers and electromagnetic encryption, ancient civilizations were already masters of the dark art of cryptography, crafting ingenious systems to protect their most vital secrets. These weren't mere puzzles, they were the lifeblood of statecraft, the hidden wiring that allowed kingdoms to expand, armies to maneuver, and emperors to rule. And the most astonishing part, some of these ancient ciphers have resisted every modern attempt to break them, standing as silent, defiant monuments to their creators' brilliance. Consider the Romans, history's great organizers. Their contribution to cryptography was both elegant and brutally practical, the Caesar cipher. This was a system of stunning simplicity where each letter in a message was shifted a fixed number of places down the alphabet. A shift of 3, for example, would turn an A into a D and a B into an E. While it seems almost childishly simple to us now, for its time it was remarkably effective. It was the perfect tool for a general on campaign, needing to quickly encrypt orders to be carried by a messenger who might be captured by tribal warriors. The code wasn't designed to be unbreakable for all time, just long enough to render the information useless by the time an enemy scribe could laboriously work it out. This points to a sophisticated understanding of the core principle of espionage. Sometimes a temporary advantage is all you need to secure a permanent victory. But if Roman codes were pragmatic, other ancient systems are utterly baffling. Take the mysterious Phaistos disk discovered on the island of Crete. This fired clay disk, dating back to the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, is covered on both sides with a spiral of stamped symbols, everything from human figures and ships to flowers and strange geometric shapes. These aren't letters from any known alphabet, they are ideograms, each symbol potentially representing an entire word or concept. Over a century after its discovery, not a single word on the disk has been definitively deciphered. Is it a religious hymn, a legal document, a piece of great literature, or most intriguingly, could it be a coded message, perhaps detailing troop movements or a secret trade route known only to a privileged few within the Minoan palace? Its secrets remain locked in clay, a tantalizing glimpse into a lost world of thought we cannot access. This leads us to a profound and often overlooked question. We study ancient history through grand monuments and recovered artifacts, but these are just the skeleton of a civilization. What if the real meat of history, the diplomatic intrigues, the secret alliances, the whispered reports of spies, was all conducted through encoded messages that have either been lost to time or sit in museum cases, dismissed as mundane? The Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Chinese all had sophisticated bureaucracies. Is it really plausible that they didn't also have sophisticated intelligence networks? The Chinese strategist Sun Tzu, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, devoted entire chapters of the art of war to the use of spies, emphasizing the need for deception and misinformation. He didn't just theorize about it, he laid out a detailed framework for running 5 different types of agents. It is almost certain that the armies and emperors who took his teachings to heart developed equally detailed methods of encrypting their spies' reports. Perhaps the greatest secret these unbroken codes hold is the possibility that they could force us to rewrite history itself. What if a decoded message revealed that a famous battle was won not by superior courage, but because a hidden agent had poisoned an enemy general's supplies? Or that a seemingly stable dynasty was actually overthrown through a carefully orchestrated campaign of disinformation spread by a rival's spies? The history we accept as fact is based on the records that survived, but the most truthful records. The candid, secret communications were designed not to survive in a readable form. Every undeciphered tablet or scroll is a potential key to a door we didn't even know was closed, hiding stories of betrayal, strategy, and secret knowledge that could completely alter our understanding of how the ancient world truly operated. Operation Fortitude stands as one of the most breathtakingly audacious deception campaigns in military history. A grand illusion orchestrated to mislead the German High Command about the location of the coming Allied invasion. While the broad strokes of this success are celebrated, the Phantom Army Group under General Patton, the inflatable tanks, and the fabricated radio traffic, the deeper, more clandestine layer of this operation is a nest of unresolved questions that center on the most unpredictable element of all, the human factor. This was a high-stakes game of chess played with double agents, and the terrifying possibility remains that not every piece on the Allied board was truly under their control. At the heart of Fortitude was the double-cross system, a British intelligence operation that had painstakingly turned every single German agent sent to Britain and convinced them to work for the Allies. These turned agents with code names like Garbo, Tricycle, and Brutus became the primary channel through which the false narrative of a coming invasion at Pas-de-Calais was fed directly to Hitler's desk. Their credibility was everything, but to maintain that credibility, they had to provide some real, verifiable information alongside the lies, a dangerous balancing act that meant occasionally sacrificing small Allied secrets to protect the enormous war-winning one. This practice, known as feeding the chicken, was a calculated risk, but it raises a profound mystery. Did any of these agents, in the process of building their credibility, discover and attempt to warn their original handlers about the true Allied plans? The most haunting figure in this drama is the agent known as Garbo, a Spanish double agent whose network of fictional sub-agents was so elaborate and convincing that he became one of the most decorated agents of the war by both sides. He received the Iron Cross from Germany and a member of the Order of the British Empire from Britain. His performance was a masterpiece of deception, but it also epitomizes the core uncertainty. Garbo's handler, Thomas Harris, was the architect of his intricate web of lies. They worked in such perfect, secretive synchrony that a disturbing theory has emerged. What if Harris himself was the double agent? The suggestion is that he used Garbo not to deceive the Germans, but as a conduit to secretly and securely communicate true intelligence to them, all under the impeccable cover of the double-cross system. While most historians dismiss this as conspiracy, the very fact it can be seriously debated highlights how the layers of deception run so deep that the truth becomes almost impossible to pin down. Beyond the individual agents lies the larger, more systemic fear. Did German intelligence, the Abwehr, suspect the entire ruse? There are intriguing hints that they might have. German aerial reconnaissance flights over the supposed invasion buildup in southeast England were surprisingly infrequent and lackadaisical. Some analysts argue this points to a chilling possibility that the Abwehr knew it was a sham and was simply playing along, either to protect their own highly placed sources within Britain or to lull the Allies into a false sense of security for a devastating counterstrike. If true, it would mean Operation Fortitude was not a brilliant Allied victory, but a catastrophic failure that nearly doomed the entire Normandy invasion. The fact that we still debate this decades later speaks to the enduring opacity of the intelligence war. This leads to the most classified secrets of all, the ones that may never see the light of day. The official records of the Double Cross Committee, while extensive, are not complete. Entire files on certain agents and specific operations remain locked away, withheld not for national security, but arguably to protect the legacy of the institutions and individuals involved. Revealing that even one of the celebrated double agents was, in fact, a triple agent still loyal to Berlin, would shatter a foundational narrative of Allied ingenuity. It would mean that some of the intelligence that shaped German defenses in Normandy was deliberately fed to them by a mole hidden within the very team tasked with deception. The ultimate, unnerving legacy of Operation Fortitude is that its success may have been far more fragile and contingent than official history admits. We know the deception worked. The German 15th Army remained pinned at Pas-de-Calais for weeks after D-Day, waiting for an attack that never came. But the possibility that this victory was achieved on a knife's edge, with hidden loyalties and breathtaking risks that could have collapsed at any moment, adds a layer of profound suspense to the story. It forces us to consider that the greatest deceptions in history are not just those we perpetrate against our enemies, but also the comforting stories we tell ourselves about how those victories were won. We know the story of the spies who were caught, the Rosenbergs, Klaus Fuchs, David Greenglass, their betrayals documented in court transcripts and declassified files. But what if their captures created a dangerous illusion of completeness, a false sense that the net had caught all the fish? The unsettling reality is that the known atomic spies almost certainly represent just the fraction of the espionage iceberg that happened to break the surface. The Soviet Union's relentless, multi-pronged effort to obtain the bomb was too vast, too determined, to rely solely on the handful of networks we later uncovered. The most terrifying secrets of the atomic age may be the ones that were stolen so perfectly that we never even knew they were gone. Consider the sheer scale of the Manhattan Project. It wasn't a single lab, but a sprawling, decentralized empire of secret cities spread across the United States, employing hundreds of thousands of people. Oak Ridge handled uranium enrichment, Hanford produced plutonium, and Los Alamos designed the weapon itself. Security was immense, but it was also strained by the breakneck pace and the overwhelming number of personnel. In such a chaotic environment, the idea that every potential leak was plugged is statistically improbable. It is far more likely that Soviet intelligence, recognizing the project's fragmented nature, ran multiple, completely isolated agent networks. This way, if one was compromised as Fuchs was, the others would remain intact, their existence unknown to the investigators rolling up the first ring. The very success in catching some spies may have inadvertently blinded us to the silent, continued success of others. This leads us to the most profound question: what did these phantom agents take? We can quantify the damage from Fuchs. We know he provided critical insights into the implosion design of the plutonium bomb. But the secrets stolen by an unknown source are a black hole in our historical record. Perhaps it was a key detail about the neutron initiator, the complex device that started the chain reaction at the precise microsecond. Maybe it was data from early tests on radiation implosion or a crucial breakthrough in metallurgy that solved a production bottleneck for the Soviets. Their atomic program advanced with astonishing speed, matching the American bomb in just 4 years, a timeline that some experts argue was aided by more than just the known espionage. The possibility exists that a final, critical piece of the puzzle was delivered by a source whose identity remains a complete mystery. The truly haunting possibility is that these unknown agents didn't simply vanish after 1945. A person clever and connected enough to infiltrate the Manhattan Project without detection would have been an intelligence asset of incalculable value during the ensuing Cold War. Imagine a mid-level physicist or administrator in 1945 who had passed secrets without ever raising suspicion. By 1960, that same individual could have quietly risen to a position of significant influence within the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission, a national laboratory, or even a defense contractor. Their access would have shifted from bomb blueprints to Cold War crown jewels, designs for the even more powerful hydrogen bomb, nuclear submarine propulsion systems, or the locations and vulnerabilities of America's atomic stockpile. This notion forces a sobering re-evaluation of certain Cold War events. Unexplained Soviet advances, curious intelligence failures, or the sudden appearance of a weapon system that seemed to mirror a still classified American design. Could some of these be attributed not to independent research or luck, but to the lifelong, undetected work of a mole planted during the Manhattan Project? Their greatest achievement wouldn't be a single stolen document, but a career of quiet, persistent betrayal, shaping the nuclear balance of power from within the very system they were undermining. The most perfect espionage leaves no history to be written, only a legacy of unexplained outcomes and unanswered questions that linger for decades. Now we turn to a mystery that strikes at the very heart of American intelligence, a phantom haunting the CIA's darkest corridors. For decades, a chilling rumor persisted among the most senior ranks of the agency that a high-level mole, a ghost in the machine, was operating deep within the CIA's own Soviet division. This wasn't just a vague suspicion. It was a conviction born from a series of catastrophic intelligence failures, blown operations, and the tragic, inexplicable deaths of American assets behind the Iron Curtain. The most frightening part of this story is that despite numerous feverish investigations, this phantom agent was never conclusively identified or caught, leaving behind a legacy of paranoia and the terrifying possibility that the greatest traitor of the Cold War simply got away with it. The evidence for this mole's existence is not a single smoking gun, but a pattern of devastating setbacks that formed a clear and bloody trail. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, nearly every important American agent the CIA had painstakingly recruited within the Soviet Union was abruptly rolled up, arrested, and almost always executed. These weren't low-level sources, they were high-value assets like Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, a GRU officer who provided priceless military intelligence during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or General Dmitry Polyakov, a top GRU official who spied for the Americans for over 2 decades. Their deaths were not just losses, they were strategic catastrophes. The sheer consistency and precision of these compromises pointed to a single, inescapable conclusion. Someone with access to the most sensitive lists of American assets was systematically betraying them to the KGB. This led to a series of internal witch hunts that tore the agency apart from the inside. The most famous of these was the hunt for the Sasha, a cryptonym for a suspected mole that obsessed legendary counterintelligence chief James "Jesus" Angleton. Angleton became convinced the mole was real, and his suspicion grew so pervasive that it effectively paralyzed the CIA's Soviet operations for years. He saw deception everywhere, trusting no one, and subjecting his own colleagues to intense scrutiny. While Angleton's methods were later deemed excessive and ultimately flawed, the core of his fear was never fully disproven. The investigations failed to find their man, but they also failed to explain away the horrific body count of compromised agents. The absence of proof was not proof of absence, it only deepened the mystery. So who could this phantom have been? The list of suspects is a roster of some of the most senior and trusted officers of the era. One prime suspect was always David Murphy, the powerful head of the CIA's Soviet division. He had access to everything, and several of the most damaging compromises occurred under his watch. Another figure was Richard Kovich, a key player in counterintelligence. Or perhaps the mole was someone even more seemingly above reproach, a loyalist whose cover was so perfect they were never even seriously considered. The most disturbing theory suggests it wasn't just one person, but a small, coordinated cell working within the agency, a cancer that had metastasized at the highest levels of American intelligence. The potential damage caused by this unidentified mole is almost incalculable. Beyond the tragic executions of brave agents, think of the strategic implications. Every piece of intelligence flowing from the Soviet Union would have been filtered through the KGB first, allowing them to feed the Americans a carefully curated diet of half-truths and disinformation. This could have warped the entire American understanding of Soviet military capabilities, economic strength, and political stability for a generation. Major geopolitical decisions, from arms control treaties to responses to Soviet provocations, may have been based on a foundation of lies, expertly crafted by the KGB and delivered by a hidden hand within the CIA itself. Perhaps the most lasting scar is the culture of profound distrust this mystery embedded within the intelligence community. It created a schism between those who believed in a monster under the bed and those who thought the fear itself was the real enemy. This internal division hampered cooperation, stifled initiative, and made officers second-guess their own colleagues. The ghost of the mole ensured that even in victory, the CIA would be looking over its own shoulder, forever wondering if the greatest threat to national security wasn't in Moscow, but in the office right next door. While the Cold War was fought with electronic intercepts and satellites, the art of secret communication and its interception is as old as diplomacy itself. Centuries before the CIA or KGB existed, nations relied on far more intimate but no less sophisticated organizations known as black chambers. These were the world's first dedicated cryptanalysis bureaus, shadowy rooms where teams of codebreakers, linguists, and forgers worked in utter secrecy to pry open the sealed diplomatic correspondence of rival powers. They were the ultimate invisible weapon, and the historical secrets they uncovered likely shaped the map of Europe for generations. Yet, the vast majority of their work was deliberately destroyed, and what remains is often still locked away, leaving us with only fragments of their immense hidden influence. The most famous of these was Austria's Geheim Kabinettskanzlei, operating from the 17th to the 19th century within sight of the imperial palace in Vienna. Their process was breathtakingly audacious. Incoming diplomatic bags from foreign embassies would be secretly diverted to a hidden laboratory. There, experts would expertly soften the wax seals using a specially designed hot spoon, allowing them to open the dispatches unnoticed. The letters were then passed to codebreakers who worked to decipher the encrypted sections. Once copied and decoded, the letters were resealed with perfect replicas of the original seals and placed back in the mailbag for delivery, often with the receiving ambassador none the wiser for months or even years. The intelligence harvested was used to outmaneuver rivals in negotiations, anticipate military moves, and blackmail susceptible diplomats. The success of the Austrian Empire for much of this period was arguably due as much to the brilliance of its codebreakers as to the strength of its armies. France had its own legendary black chamber known as the Cabinet Noir. Established under King Louis XIII and reaching its peak under Louis XIV, it became a formidable instrument of state power. Its existence was an open secret among the diplomatic corps, who lived in constant fear of their dispatches being violated. This pervasive paranoia itself became a weapon for the French. The mere suspicion that their codes were broken could cause ambassadors to write less, or to avoid committing sensitive thoughts to paper at all, stifling communication and creating mistrust between foreign governments and their own representatives. The Cabinet Noir's successes were numerous, but its archives were almost entirely purged during the tumult of the French Revolution. wiping away a century's worth of decrypted secrets that could have offered an unfiltered, raw view into the private thoughts and true intentions of Europe's royal courts. This systematic destruction of their archives is the greatest tragedy for historians. When these chambers were finally disbanded, often under public pressure for more transparent governance, their records were not lovingly preserved for posterity. They were incinerated. The reason was simple: protecting methods and sources, to keep the full extent of their successes secret, and to avoid the immense diplomatic scandals that would erupt if it were revealed how many thousands of private letters had been read. Governments chose to erase the evidence entirely. This means we have lost the verbatim text of countless decrypted messages. We know from scattered reports and invoices that the Black Chambers were successful, but we rarely know the specific, shocking details of what they read. A casual sentence in a decoded letter could have revealed a hidden affair that toppled a government, or a secret clause in a treaty that betrayed an ally. That raw, unvarnished history is gone forever. This leads to the most compelling historical question: what did they learn that we will never know? The possibility exists that some of the history we take for granted is based on a fundamental lie that a Black Chamber discovered but that never became public. For instance, the true motives behind a monarch's declaration of war might have been revealed in a decrypted personal letter to a confidant, showing it was for personal glory or debt rather than the national interest stated publicly. A secret agreement between two nations to carve up a third, independent country might have been intercepted and used by a third party to their advantage, preventing the carve-up but leaving the original conspiracy hidden from the historical record. The decrypted files of a Black Chamber would be the ultimate behind-the-scenes transcript of the 17th and 18th centuries, and their loss means we are often left studying the public performance of history, not the private reality. The tantalizing possibility is that not all of this knowledge was destroyed. Some documents likely survive, buried in the classified archives of modern intelligence agencies that inherited the legacy of these Black Chambers. These organizations have a long institutional memory and a habit of never throwing anything away. A chest of decrypted 17th-century Venetian dispatches or decoded Prussian military orders could still be sitting in a vault in London, Paris, or Vienna, considered too sensitive or too embarrassing to release even centuries later. The contents could challenge the foundational stories of modern nation-states, reveal that revered historical figures were blackmailed or compromised, or prove that certain wars were started under entirely false pretenses. The lost secrets of the Black Chambers remind us that the official history of diplomacy is often just the story that survived, while the real, uncensored truth was read once in a secret room by a codebreaker and then taken to the grave. If the hunt for a mole within the CIA created a storm of paranoia, then the possibility of a phantom spy buried deep within NATO's very heart represents a potential hurricane that could have reshaped the entire Cold War. During the most perilous decades of the standoff, a series of inexplicable intelligence leaks and curious Soviet strategic advantages pointed to a terrifying conclusion: that the West's premier defensive alliance, the very organization designed to counter the Soviet threat, might have been critically compromised from within. This isn't the story of a single identified traitor. It's the lingering mystery of a ghost, a high-level mole whose existence is inferred from the carnage left behind, but who was never definitively named or caught. The evidence for this phantom is a pattern of unsettling incidents rather than a single document. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, NATO's most sensitive defense plans, particularly those detailing how the alliance would respond to a massive Warsaw Pact invasion of Western Europe, seemed to be an open book to Soviet strategists. War games and strategic exercises designed to test NATO response times and operational doctrines repeatedly yielded bizarre results. Soviet forces in these simulations would consistently anticipate and counter NATO moves with an almost prescient understanding, maneuvering to block key reinforcements and striking preemptively at choke points that were supposed to be secret. This went beyond educated guesswork. It suggested a deep familiarity with the Alliance's most closely guarded contingency plans. The most chilling real-world evidence came from the realm of weapons technology. NATO relied on its technological edge to counter the Warsaw Pact's numerical superiority. Yet, time and again, new Soviet weapons systems would appear that seemed specifically engineered to counter upcoming Western technology, sometimes before it was even fully deployed. The development of certain advanced Soviet anti-aircraft and anti-ship missiles, for instance, exhibited an uncanny understanding of the electronic countermeasures and radar signatures of next-generation NATO aircraft and vessels. This pattern strongly suggested that the Soviets weren't just engaging in parallel research. They were receiving detailed technical specifications, allowing them to build their defenses specifically to negate the West's newest offensive capabilities. So who could this phantom have been? The list of suspects is necessarily a short one, encompassing only those with the cosmic-level clearance needed to access such overarching strategic plans. The mole would almost certainly have been a very senior official within the NATO military command structure, a top civilian strategist at Alliance headquarters, or a high-ranking diplomat from a member nation with access to the nuclear planning group. Some investigators have pointed the finger at senior officers from allied nations with known sympathies or connections, while others have speculated about the possibility of a long-term, deep-cover illegal agent who had spent decades meticulously building a career that would grant them this ultimate access. The mole's identity remains the central, unanswered question of the entire mystery. The potential damage is almost too vast to calculate. If the Soviets had a detailed blueprint of NATO war plans, it would have allowed them to craft their own invasion strategy with devastating efficiency, potentially shaving days off their advance and leading to a swift military and political collapse of Western Europe. Even more terrifying is the possibility that this agent had access to the procedures for the release of tactical nuclear weapons, the very cornerstone of NATO deterrent strategy. Knowing the exact thresholds, communication channels, and launch protocols would have given the Soviets an unimaginable advantage, potentially allowing them to disrupt the command chain and decapitate the Alliance's ability to respond at the most critical moment. This phantom didn't just leak documents, they may have held the keys to the final war. This case remains officially open because it is so deeply intertwined with other unsolved espionage mysteries of the era, particularly the hunt for the mole within the CIA. It is possible they were one and the same, a single super spy operating in a position that granted access to both American and Alliance secrets. Alternatively, they could have been two separate assets, part of a breathtakingly successful Soviet penetration of the entire Western defense apparatus. Without a confession or a definitive piece of evidence, the ghost of the NATO mole endures as a chilling reminder that during the Cold War, the most dangerous secrets may not have been stolen from locked safes, but from the conference rooms where the very plans to protect the free world were being drawn. Beyond the celebrated triumphs of Bletchley Park and the breaking of Enigma lies a vast ocean of wartime communication that remains locked away, encrypted in codes and ciphers that defied all efforts to crack them during the war and continue to resist solution even today. These unbroken messages are silent sentinels from the past, tantalizing capsules that may contain anything from mundane logistical updates to world-altering secrets, their contents forever suspended just out of our historical reach. The effort to solve them is more than an academic puzzle. It's a race against time to recover lost chapters of history before the last of the codebreakers and historians who understand their context are gone. Consider the immense volume of traffic generated by all sides in the conflict. While the Allies had spectacular success with certain systems like Enigma and Purple, countless other encryption methods were used by every nation involved. The German Lawrence cipher, used for high-level strategic communications between the Army High Command and field generals, was even more complex than Enigma and only partially broken late in the war. An untold number of Lawrence messages were intercepted but never decrypted, potentially containing Hitler's most sensitive orders and strategic assessments. Similarly, the Japanese used a multitude of codes beyond their famous purple cipher for diplomatic traffic. Their army codes, in particular, were notoriously difficult and many were never broken, leaving gaps in our understanding of their plans in China and Southeast Asia. But the most compelling mysteries lie with the messages that were flagged as urgent or unusual by intercept operators but never understood. These are the true ghosts in the ether. A sudden, frantic burst of coded traffic from a U-boat in the mid-Atlantic, followed by silence. An encrypted order sent to a Japanese island garrison just before a devastating American assault. A lengthy transmission from a Soviet spy ring in Switzerland that was intercepted but never decoded. Each of these represents a specific moment, a decision, or a piece of intelligence that could change our understanding of a known event or reveal an operation history has completely forgotten. What could these unbroken codes still reveal? The possibilities are staggering. One message could detail the location of a lost Nazi gold train, its contents and final resting place known only to a few who encoded the information for a secret recovery mission that never happened. Another could be the final report of a deep-cover agent whose existence was never suspected, detailing their infiltration of a key program and the secrets they stole. There could be confirmation of high-level meetings or secret peace feelers that were kept entirely off the official record, known only through these encrypted channels. For historians, every unbroken message is a door to a room they cannot enter, a conversation they cannot hear. The quest to break these codes continues with a small but dedicated group of modern cryptographers, historians, and amateur sleuths. They are no longer armed with bombs and pencil and paper, but with distributed computing power and sophisticated algorithms that can test millions of permutations in the time it took their wartime counterparts to test one. Every so often, there is a breakthrough. In 2012, a team successfully decrypted a KGB message from 1943 that had been sitting in archives for decades, though its contents remain controversial. Other groups focus on the remaining messages enciphered with the notorious German Lawrence machine, applying modern computational linguistics to attack the problem from new angles. Yet the challenge is immense. These aren't just mathematical puzzles, they are linguistic and historical ones. Many of these codes relied on one-time pads, which are theoretically unbreakable if used correctly. Others use codebooks that were destroyed after the war, leaving no cribs or known plaintext to use as a key. The greatest obstacle is often a lack of context. A codebreaker might crack a message only to find it refers to operations, locations, or people by code names that are themselves unknown, leaving the text decrypted but still largely incomprehensible. The true meaning of these messages dies with the individuals who sent and received them. This enduring mystery forces a humbling realization about our understanding of World War II. The history books are written from the documents that survived and were able to be read. But for every decrypted message that informed a general's decision or exposed a spy, there are countless others that passed through the ether, their meaning hidden, their impact unknown. The unbroken codes are a permanent reminder that our narrative of the war is incomplete. The full story of the conflict, with all its secret operations, hidden betrayals, and lost opportunities, is still partially encrypted, waiting in archives and private collections for the right mind or the right technology to finally bring it to light. While we often picture Roman power in the form of gleaming legions and monumental architecture, some of its most potent instruments were the men who moved unseen, the spies and informants of a sophisticated intelligence web that stretched across the known world. The Romans understood that an empire could not be ruled by force alone. It required information. Yet, for a civilization that meticulously recorded everything from grain shipments to legal speeches, the inner workings of their espionage services remain one of history's most frustrating silences, a ghost in the machine of their sprawling administration. Two groups are most frequently cited as the backbone of Roman intelligence. The first were the frumentarii. Their official title meant wheat men, and their public duty was to oversee the vital grain supply for the legions stationed on the frontiers. This cover was sheer genius, who would question the comings and goings of a logistics officer. It granted them a perfect reason to travel everywhere, ask questions about local conditions, and move between military camps and civilian populations without raising an eyebrow. But their true function was far darker. They were the emperor's secret police, his couriers of sensitive messages, and his assassins. They gathered intelligence on potential dissent, monitored the loyalty of provincial governors, and quietly removed threats to imperial power. So feared did they become that they were eventually disbanded due to popular hatred, only to be replaced by an even more secretive agency, the agents in rebus. The second group, the speculators, were the military's elite intelligence operatives. Attached to legions, they served as scouts, reconnaissance experts, and covert operatives deep in enemy territory. Before a campaign, speculators would infiltrate rival kingdoms, mapping terrain, assessing the strength of enemy forces, and identifying potential traitors or allies within the opposing leadership. They were the ones who could speak local languages, blend in with native populations, and bring back the priceless tactical knowledge that allowed Roman generals to outmaneuver their foes on the battlefield. A general like Julius Caesar's victories in Gaul were as much a testament to the intelligence provided by his speculators as to the discipline of his legions. The great historical mystery is not whether Rome had spies. We know they did, but the sheer scale of what they accomplished that was never written down. Their successes, by their very nature, had to remain secret. Consider the countless plots against emperors that were thwarted, the barbarian uprisings that were crushed before they began because a frumentarius intercepted a message between chieftains, or the enemy kings who suddenly died under mysterious circumstances just before a planned invasion. These were not events for the history books. They were quiet victories in a shadow war, their true causes known only to a handful of men in the emperor's innermost circle. This systemic silence forces a profound question. How much of Rome's seemingly unstoppable expansion was actually facilitated by this hidden network? We see the end result, the legions marching in and claiming territory, but we are often blind to the covert operations that made those conquests possible. A key city gate might have been unlocked not by bravery, but by bribery orchestrated by a speculator. A rival army might have been starving and divided because a frumentarius had successfully sabotaged their supply lines weeks earlier. The official chronicles would record a brilliant general and a brave army, but the unsung hero would be the anonymous agent who made their victory inevitable. The most tantalizing possibility is that some of their greatest exploits involved not just military matters, but the theft of knowledge itself. The Roman fascination with foreign technology and culture is well documented. Is it really plausible that their sophisticated aqueduct systems, architectural innovations, and naval designs were developed entirely in isolation? It is far more likely that Roman agents were tasked with what we would now call industrial espionage, infiltrating rival civilizations like Ptolemaic Egypt or the Persian empires to acquire advanced knowledge in engineering, astronomy, and medicine. A scroll on siege warfare stolen from a Greek library, or the secret of a stronger alloy of steel learned from a captured Eastern smith, could have provided a crucial advantage that shaped the course of history, all without a single mention in any Roman record. This loss of their clandestine history means our understanding of the ancient world is fundamentally incomplete. We study the treaties, the battles, and the speeches, but we are missing the hidden wiring, the bribes, the blackmail, the kidnappings, and the assassinations that truly conducted the flow of power. The silent success of Rome's spies ensured the empire's longevity, but it also ensured that the full, uncensored story of how that empire was built and maintained is a secret that the ancient world has kept quite perfectly for over 2,000 years. The Cold War was a hall of mirrors where nothing was ever quite as it seemed, and nowhere was this more true than in the shadowy world of double agents. We know the famous stories of those who were caught or who defected, their betrayals and deceptions laid bare in memoirs and court documents. But this official history creates a dangerous illusion of closure, suggesting that once a spy was turned or a mole was rooted out, the ledger was somehow balanced. The far more unsettling reality is that the most successful double agents of the Cold War are, by definition, the ones we never discovered. These phantoms are the ultimate embodiment of espionage perfection operatives who played both sides with such flawless skill that they retired with pensions and honors from both, their true allegiance a secret they took to the grave. Consider the immense structural incentive for such a phantom to exist. For a case officer in the CIA or MI6, running a high-level double agent within the KGB was the pinnacle of professional achievement. The intelligence such a source could provide was considered gold dust, often leading to promotions, medals, and legendary status within the agency. This created a powerful psychological blind spot. An officer who believed they had successfully turned a valuable Soviet asset would fight tooth and nail to protect that source, dismissing any faint whispers of doubt or contradictory evidence as envious gossip or enemy disinformation. This environment was a perfect playground for a triple agent, a spy pretending to be turned by the West but who remained loyal to Moscow Center all along. They could feed just enough verified, low-level intelligence to build an unshakable reputation for reliability, all while being carefully controlled by their KGB handlers to protect deeper secrets and to funnel devastating disinformation directly into the heart of the Western intelligence machine. The damage such an unidentified double agent could have wrought is terrifying to contemplate. Every piece of intelligence they provided would have to be meticulously vetted and acted upon, potentially sending entire divisions of analysts down fruitless rabbit holes. Worse, they could have compromised real, valuable Western agents. Imagine a scenario where a triple agent, celebrated by the CIA, is given a list of potential Soviet citizens to recruit. That list would immediately be on its way to Moscow, not to be avoided but to be used as a hit list. The triple agent could then take credit for the inevitable arrests, explaining them away as bad luck or superior KGB counterintelligence, thereby strengthening their own cover while systematically eliminating the West's actual assets. This kind of operation wouldn't just leak secrets, it would actively dismantle an intelligence service from within, breeding paranoia and mistrust among allies. Lingering doubts about certain operatives continue to haunt the old guard of the intelligence community. Even after retirement, former officers will sometimes point to a particular case that was almost too good to be true. A Soviet source who provided a steady stream of actionable intelligence yet somehow always emerged unscathed from every internal purge in Moscow. They wonder about the lone operator who consistently avoided surveillance, or the asset whose information occasionally led to inexplicable, catastrophic failures that were written off as coincidence. These unresolved questions are not just professional curiosity. They are the scars of a hidden war where the final body count of betrayed agents and sabotaged operations may never be fully known, because the architect of those disasters remains a respected name in the annals of Western intelligence. The most perfect double-cross would leave no history at all. The greatest triumph for a phantom double agent wouldn't be a medal from the Kremlin, but a quiet retirement dinner attended by their unsuspecting CIA colleagues, a framed certificate of commendation on their wall, and the absolute certainty that they had shaped the course of the Cold War from the shadows, their true legacy known only to themselves. Their success means that our understanding of this decades-long conflict is built, in some small part, on a foundation of lies that we are still incapable of detecting, a permanent and silent asterisk beside every history book ever written about the era. While the Civil War is remembered for its epic battles and iconic leaders, it was also the backdrop for one of the most intense and chaotic espionage conflicts in American history, a shadow war fought in drawing rooms, bordellos, and the dark corners of wartime Washington and Richmond. Unlike the organized intelligence services of the World Wars, espionage in the 1860s was a fragmented, often amateur affair, run by a colorful cast of characters with code names like Rebel Rose and Wild Rose, and reliant on everything from cleverly folded notes to messages hidden in hollowed-out watch cases. Because so much of this work was conducted in absolute secrecy, with records deliberately destroyed or never kept in the first place, we are left with a historical record that is more a collection of intriguing fragments than a complete picture, a puzzle missing most of its pieces. Consider the sheer scale of the unknown. We know the famous names like the glamorous Confederate spy Rose O'Neal Greenhow, who used her Washington salon to gather secrets from powerful politicians, or Elizabeth Van Lew, the wealthy Virginian who ran a sophisticated Union spy ring from her mansion in the Confederate capital. But for every Rose Greenhow who was caught and became famous, there were undoubtedly dozens, perhaps hundreds, of agents who operated with such skill that they were never detected at all. These unknown operatives are the true phantoms of the Civil War. They could have been a quiet telegraph operator in a key railroad depot, subtly altering train schedules to delay reinforcements. They might have been a society matron in Charleston, overhearing naval plans at a dinner party and passing them to a blockade runner. Their successes, by their very nature, left no trace in the official record, leaving us to wonder just how many battles, large and small, were subtly shaped by information provided by a source whose name we will never know. This leads to the most compelling mystery of all, the possibility that crucial intelligence operations, which may have decided the fate of entire campaigns, were so secret that they were never documented by either side. Take, for instance, the days leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg. We know that Confederate General James Longstreet's trusted scout, Henry Thomas Harrison, provided Robert E. Lee with vital information on the Union Army's positions, information that convinced Lee to concentrate his forces at the small Pennsylvania town. But what if Harrison's report was not solely the product of his own reconnaissance? What if it was the culmination of intelligence gathered by a network of deep-cover Confederate agents in Maryland and Pennsylvania, whose reports were funneled to him through cutouts and couriers? The existence of such a network would never have been written down. Its members would have been ordinary-seeming citizens, their espionage a temporary duty. Their contribution to one of the war's most pivotal moments would be utterly invisible to history. The same questions surround many of the war's great puzzles. Why did Union General George McClellan consistently overestimate the size of Lee's army during the Peninsula Campaign, leading to his chronic hesitation? The official explanation is poor cavalry reconnaissance, but another, more tantalizing theory suggests he may have been the victim of a brilliant Confederate disinformation campaign. What if a single, highly placed double agent within the War Department's telegraph office was subtly altering intelligence reports or feeding fabricated estimates of Confederate strength to the general? An operation of that nature would have been among the war's most closely guarded secrets, and if it existed, its architect would have taken that knowledge to the grave. The technology of the time itself created permanent mysteries. The use of the telegraph was a revolution in military communication, but it was also horrifically insecure. Lines were constantly tapped and cipher systems were rudimentary. This means that an untold number of intercepted messages were read by both sides, their contents used to gain an immediate advantage on the battlefield. Because these intercepts were ephemeral, acted upon instantly, and then destroyed to protect the source, they vanished from history. A Confederate victory at a minor crossroads or a successful Union ambush on a supply train might not have been a matter of tactical genius, but the direct result of a telegram read moments after it was sent, a secret advantage that left no documentation behind beyond a cryptic note in a general's diary. Perhaps the most profound legacy of this lost espionage is the realization that our understanding of the Civil War is inherently incomplete. We study the battle maps and the official dispatches, but we are largely deaf to the whispers that passed through the lines, the secrets sold for gold, and the loyalties that were never what they seemed. For every known spy, there were likely 10 whose identities are lost, their dangerous journeys and stolen secrets known only to themselves. Their stories are the true missing pages of history, silent testaments to a war fought not just with rifles and cannons, but with cunning, courage, and a willingness to operate in a darkness so complete that even history itself could not find them. Deep within the secret history of the Cold War, a name echoes through declassified files not as a person, but as a profound enigma, the source known only as Max. This wasn't an ordinary informant. The intelligence provided under this cryptonym was so exceptionally high-level and accurate that it fundamentally shaped the Western understanding of Soviet strategic thought during the most dangerous years of the standoff. Yet, despite decades of analysis and speculation, the true identity of Max remains one of espionage's most perfect secrets, a ghost who provided a window into the enemy's mind and then vanished without a trace. The value of Max lay in the breathtaking scope and authority of the information. This was not tactical gossip or low-level secrets, it was strategic gold. The intelligence included detailed insights into the Soviet Politburo's inner debates, their genuine assessment of their own military strength versus NATO, and perhaps most critically, their true intentions and fears regarding nuclear confrontation. This was the kind of information that could only come from someone at the very apex of Soviet power, a member of the Central Committee, a top general in the Red Army, or a key advisor with direct access to the Kremlin's innermost sanctums. For Western analysts, Max was like a voice from the other side of the mirror, providing a candid, unvarnished view that completely contradicted the public bravado and propaganda emanating from Moscow. This leads to the central, haunting question: what could possibly motivate such a person, an individual at the pinnacle of the Soviet system, enjoying all the privileges and power that came with it, would be risking everything, not just their career, but their life and the lives of their entire family, by passing secrets to the West? The motivation couldn't be money. Such a person would have had little need for it. The most compelling theory is ideology, but not in the traditional sense. This wouldn't have been a defector in place who believed in capitalism. Instead, Max might have been a true patriot, a Soviet insider who was so horrified by the prospect of a nuclear Armageddon that they took unimaginable risks to ensure both superpowers understood the reality of the balance of power, thereby preventing a miscalculation that could end the world. They weren't betraying their country. In their mind, they might have been trying to save it and everyone else from annihilation. Another enduring mystery is how Max managed to operate with such impunity under the nose of the KGB, arguably the most ruthless and efficient counterintelligence apparatus in the world at the time. The most likely explanation is that their position was so exalted that they were above routine suspicion. The KGB's mandate was to look for enemies of the state among the populace and the lower ranks of the party, not within its own elite ruling class. The very idea that a member of the Politburo could be a traitor might have been too catastrophic for even the KGB to entertain. Max would have also possessed an intuitive understanding of the system's security protocols, allowing them to bypass them with ease, perhaps by using a trusted intermediary who was themselves completely unaware of the source's true identity. This notion of intermediaries opens up the possibility that Max was not one person, but a clever construct of allied intelligence. What if Max was a composite, a single cryptonym created to protect a handful of less senior but still well-placed sources? By funneling all their intelligence through one fictionalized supersource, case officers could create a legendary asset that would be impossible for the KGB to pinpoint, as he didn't actually exist. This would also explain the seemingly encyclopedic knowledge Max possessed across different domains of the Soviet state. It was the pooled reporting of several individuals, not the work of a lone genius. Yet another theory pushes into even more unexpected territory. What if Max was not a Soviet official at all, but a brilliant and cynical Western deception? In this scenario, Max was a phantom created by a Western intelligence agency to add irresistible credibility to their own strategic estimates, especially those intended for the ears of their own political leaders. By attributing a critical analysis to a mythical high-level Soviet source, an intelligence chief could bypass bureaucratic skepticism and ensure their assessment was taken with the utmost seriousness, effectively using a fabricated legend to shape policy from within. The legacy of Max is a permanent testament to the opaque nature of Cold War intelligence. The source's contributions may have literally helped keep the peace by providing a clear, unfiltered line into Soviet thinking, preventing dangerous misunderstandings during crises like the Berlin Wall standoff or the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the enduring lack of certainty about their identity means we can never fully contextualize or verify the information they provided. Were we reading the genuine fears of the Soviet leadership, or were we, perhaps, reading what someone wanted us to believe they feared? The ghost of Max ensures that a crucial part of the Cold War's history is built upon a foundation of magnificent uncertainty, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable truths are delivered by a shadow whose face we will never see. While Daniel Ellsberg is rightly remembered as the courageous figure who brought the Pentagon Papers to light, his singular narrative may have inadvertently obscured a far more complex and shadowy truth. The official story is one of a lone idealist, a Rand Corporation analyst who, disillusioned by the escalating deceit of the Vietnam War, single-handedly photocopied a 7,000-page top-secret study and delivered it to the press. But the sheer scale and logistics of this operation raise persistent, troubling questions that suggest Ellsberg might not have been acting alone. The notion of one man, under immense psychological strain, meticulously copying every page of a massive 47-volume history without assistance, without a single confidant, stretches the bounds of credulity. This leads to a compelling alternate theory, that Ellsberg was the public face of a wider, silent conspiracy of leakers, a network of disaffected officials within the national security apparatus who collectively decided the American people had a right to know the truth. The possibility of additional, unknown leakers is rooted in the document's own sprawling nature. The Pentagon Papers were not a single report but a vast historical analysis, commissioned by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, that involved interviews with and contributions from dozens of officials across the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA. Many of these individuals had access to their own sections of the study long before it was bound together. Is it really plausible that Ellsberg was the only person among this large group who felt a moral compulsion to act? It is far more likely that others, perhaps lower-level aides or mid-level analysts, provided Ellsberg with crucial portions of the documents, or even copied their own sections independently, creating a distributed and deniable pipeline of information that has never been fully uncovered. These phantom leakers would have enjoyed the perfect cover. Ellsberg's very public prosecution absorbed all the attention and scrutiny, allowing them to remain in the shadows, their consciences clear and their identities protected. This theory forces us to confront an even more unsettling question. If there were other leakers, what else did they take? The Pentagon Papers themselves were a historical study, chronicling decisions made between 1945 and 1967. But the Vietnam War was raging in the present tense when they were leaked in 1971. What about the contemporaneous secrets? The ongoing bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Laos, which were conducted in secret. The current estimates of casualty figures that were being deliberately underreported. The internal debates about the war's unwinnability that were happening in the Nixon White House at that very moment. It is highly probable that a broader circle of leakers would have had access to this far more sensitive, real-time information. They could have taken documents that exposed not just past lies but present ones, secrets so explosive that they were deemed too dangerous to release even by the most anti-war publishers, and were subsequently destroyed or hidden away forever. The investigation into the leak itself adds fuel to this mystery. The White House Plumbers Unit, the illegal covert operations group formed to stop leaks, famously burglarized the office of Ellsberg psychiatrist Lewis Fielding in a desperate attempt to find damaging information. But their actions suggest a belief that went beyond one man. The zeal and illegality of their efforts imply that the Nixon administration itself suspected a wider conspiracy, a belief that Ellsberg was merely a node in a larger network they were desperate to unmask. Their failure to find evidence of this network doesn't prove it didn't exist. It may only prove that the other members were better hidden, their tradecraft superior to that of the clumsy plumbers. The very creation of this rogue unit is a testament to the paranoia that the leak inspired, a paranoia that might have been rooted in a terrifying truth they could never quite grasp. Ultimately, the legacy of the Pentagon Papers leak is a dual one. We celebrate the brave act that helped end a war and affirmed the power of a free press. But we are also left with a ghost story, a lingering whisper of other patriots or traitors depending on one's perspective, who moved in the shadows alongside Daniel Ellsberg. These unknown figures, if they existed, represent a permanent enigma. They took a tremendous risk for their country and then vanished back into their ordinary lives, their contribution unacknowledged and their secrets their own. They serve as a reminder that the most impactful acts of conscience are sometimes collective, and that the full history of dissent is often written not in headlines, but in the silent, shared resolve of individuals who decided that some secrets are too important to keep. The heroism of the French resistance is etched into the history of World War II, a powerful story of ordinary citizens risking everything to fight an occupying evil. We know the tales of sabotage, the derailed trains, and the secret newspapers that defied Nazi propaganda. But behind these celebrated acts of defiance lay a far more secretive and perilous war, a shadow conflict of intelligence gathering where the most successful operatives were those who left no trace at all. For every resistance fighter who was caught and became a martyr, there were countless others who moved silently through the darkness, their contributions so clandestine that they were never recorded, their identities forever lost to history. Consider the immense practical challenge of documenting anything in that environment. Resistance networks were deliberately cellular, meaning members of one group knew very little about the members of another. This was a security precaution to ensure that if someone was captured and broke under torture, they could only betray a handful of comrades. Communications were fleeting whispers, messages written in invisible ink on seemingly innocent letters, or dead drops in hollowed-out trees. There were no personnel files, no official rosters. An agent's entire existence was often known only to their direct handler, and if that handler was killed, the agent's very existence could be erased. This necessary secrecy means we will never know the true number of those who served in the shadows, the nameless men and women who provided the tiny fragments of intelligence that, when pieced together, created a vital picture of German strength and intentions. What secrets did these unknown agents steal? Their work was often less dramatic than a blown-up bridge but far more strategically significant. It could be a factory worker in a Renault plant, secretly tallying the production numbers of tanks being repaired for the German army and passing that information to a courier. It might be a cleaner in a commandant office, carefully piecing together the shreds of discarded carbon paper to reconstruct the contents of a classified memo about troop rotations. Or a railway switchman noting the serial numbers and destinations of trains carrying men and material to the front, allowing Allied bombers to precisely target them. These individual acts seemed small, but in aggregate, they provided the Allies with a real-time map of the German war machine in France, enabling the precise planning needed for the D-Day landings and the subsequent liberation. This shadow world was the perfect breeding ground for the most sinister possibility of all, the double agent. The constant cat-and-mouse game with the Gestapo meant that many resistants were captured. While some chose death, others were brutally tortured and then turned, forced to return to their networks as double agents under the threat of harm to their families. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, became adept at running these false resistance groups, using them to feed disinformation to London and to identify and roll up genuine agents. The most successful of these double agents would have been those who were never discovered, who played their part so convincingly that they were decorated by both sides, their ultimate loyalties known only to themselves. The mystery of their true allegiance is perhaps the most haunting legacy. After the war, countless accusations of collaboration were flung, some true, some born of petty vendettas. In this chaotic atmosphere, a truly successful double agent could have easily faded back into civilian life, their wartime activities either unpurged or deliberately whitewashed. The possibility exists that some local heroes celebrated for their resistance work were, in fact, controlled by the Germans for part of the war. Their actions a complex mix of genuine resistance and calculated betrayal designed to maintain their cover. We will simply never know for certain, as the only people who knew the truth took it with them to the grave. This uncertainty forces us to re-evaluate the very nature of resistance. It was not a simple binary of good versus evil, but a murky realm of impossible choices, where trust was a luxury and survival often required morally ambiguous compromises. The greatest success of these unknown spies was their silence. Their stories are the missing pages in the history of the war, a permanent reminder that for every celebrated act of courage we know about, there are a dozen more that were so perfectly executed they left no history behind at all. While the shadow wars of the 20th century were fought with radios and microfilm, some of the most sophisticated and enduring espionage mysteries were crafted with nothing more than quill, ink, and a brilliant, paranoid mind. To understand the court of Queen Elizabeth I is to step into a world where conspiracy was a constant hum in the background, where Catholic plots to replace the Protestant queen were as common as courtly intrigues, and where survival depended on a well-honed network of spies and the impenetrable codes that protected their secrets. This was the golden age of the cipher, and despite centuries of effort, dozens of their encrypted messages remain unbroken, locked boxes holding the untold stories of a reign defined by danger and deception. The mastermind behind this clandestine web was Sir Francis Walsingham, the Queen's principal secretary and spymaster. A genuinely formidable intellect, Walsingham built an intelligence apparatus that stretched across Europe, from the bustling ports of the Mediterranean to the conspiratorial drawing rooms of Paris and Madrid. His agents intercepted letters, bribed servants, and infiltrated the inner circles of Elizabeth's most powerful enemies, most notably those of Mary, Queen of Scots. But intercepting a letter was only half the battle. The real work began when his team of codebreakers, led by the gifted linguist Thomas Phelps, had to crack the sophisticated ciphers used to protect their contents. This was a constant, high-stakes intellectual duel, a battle of wits where a single decrypted phrase could mean the difference between the Queen's survival and a successful assassination plot. The codes themselves were marvels of Renaissance ingenuity, far more complex than a simple substitution cipher. They often used a combination of symbols, nulls, meaningless characters inserted to confuse, and homophones where a single letter could be represented by multiple different symbols. Some employed cipher wheels or complex codebooks where entire words or names were replaced with numeric codes. For instance, Elizabeth herself was often designated by the number 24, while the Spanish King Philip II might be 100. Breaking these required not just mathematical skill, but a deep understanding of politics, personal relationships, and the linguistic patterns of the time. A modern codebreaker with a supercomputer would still struggle without that essential historical context. The most famous success of this system was, of course, the decoding of the letters that finally ensnared Mary, Queen of Scots, in the Babington plot, leading to her execution. But for every plot they uncovered, how many more slipped through the cracks? This is where the unbroken ciphers become so tantalizing. Sealed away in archives like the National Archives at Kew are letters that even the brilliant Phelps could not decipher. These aren't trivial notes, they are often lengthy communications between ambassadors, conspirators, and royals, their contents completely unknown to history. Each one represents a conversation we can never hear, a plan we can never fully understand. What staggering secrets might these documents hold? One unbroken cipher could detail a previously unknown assassination attempt on Elizabeth, organized by a faction within her own court. Another might reveal the identity of a high-born nobleman who was secretly working as a double agent for Spain, his treason so perfectly concealed that his descendants are still celebrated today. There could be letters that expose the full, horrifying extent of the torture of Catholic priests, information Walsingham would have been desperate to keep encrypted even from his own clerks. Or perhaps they contain the truth about the most enduring literary mystery of all. Was the Earl of Oxford or another courtier the real author behind the plays of William Shakespeare? It seems far-fetched, but in a world where politics and art were inextricably linked, such a secret would be exactly the kind of dangerous knowledge that required the strongest possible encryption. The effort to break these codes is very much alive today. Cryptographers, historians, and a global community of amateur sleuths are now applying 21st century technology to these 16th century puzzles. They use statistical analysis software to look for patterns and frequency distributions that the human eye might miss. They crowdsource potential solutions, allowing thousands of minds to attack a single problem simultaneously. Yet the greatest challenge remains the same as it was for Walsingham's men: a lack of context. Without a known crib, a guessed word or phrase, to use as a key, even the most powerful algorithm can spin endlessly. The answer might lie in a forgotten dialect, an obscure nickname, or a personal joke shared only between the sender and receiver, all of which died with them centuries ago. The true legacy of these unbroken ciphers is the humbling realization of how much we don't know about this pivotal period. Our understanding of the Elizabethan era is built on the documents that were read, the plots that were uncovered, and the stories that were allowed to be told. But history is written by the survivors, and Elizabeth and Walsingham were masters of controlling the narrative. The encrypted letters that resisted them represent the other side of that story, the conversations they were never meant to hear, the secrets that remained loyal to their senders. They are permanent ghosts in the machine of history, ensuring that the final, full truth of the Elizabethan court, with all its glittering danger and dark conspiracies, remains forever just out of reach, a tantalizing mystery encrypted in ink and time. While we often picture Cold War espionage in terms of human moles and double agents, some of the most devastating breaches may have occurred in complete silence through the invisible medium of the airwaves. The history books tell us about the famous cases of signals intelligence, like the Venona decrypts or the tapping of Berlin's underground cables, but these represent only the successes we know about. A far more unsettling possibility haunts the legacy of this era: that the Soviets achieved pervasive, long-term penetration of Western encrypted communications that was so comprehensive and so cleverly hidden that its full extent was never discovered, and that some of these breaches may have continued for decades without detection. The scale of this potential compromise is difficult to overstate. During the Cold War, the West's entire command and control structure, from NATO strategy to diplomatic negotiations, relied on encrypted signals. We assume that our most secure systems, from complex cipher machines to early digital encryption, remained inviolate. But what if that assumption was catastrophically wrong? The Soviets invested immense resources in signals intelligence, or SIGINT, through their extensive programs run by the KGB and GRU. Their approach was not to break every code, but to find the weakest link in the chain, a flawed encryption algorithm, a lazy operator who reused keys, a maintenance technician who could be bribed to install a bug, or a stolen piece of cipher hardware that could be reverse-engineered in a Moscow laboratory. The goal was not always immediate decryption, but to plant a vulnerability that could be exploited years or even decades later. This leads us to one of the most troubling mysteries: which encrypted channels believed to be secure were actually compromised. We know of some instances, like the famous Great Seal bug planted in the American embassy in Moscow, but these are the ones that were found. The real damage was likely done by breaches that were never discovered. For instance, certain high-frequency diplomatic teletype circuits used by the State Department in the 1960s and 70s employed encryption systems that were later found to have theoretical weaknesses. While there's no public evidence they were broken, the possibility remains that for a critical period, sensitive diplomatic cables were being read by Soviet analysts as easily as if they'd been sent in plain text. Similarly, early secure telephone systems used by NATO military commanders might have been vulnerable to sophisticated intercept and decryption efforts, potentially revealing troop movements and contingency plans during moments of extreme crisis. The duration of these hypothetical breaches is another layer of the enigma. A single, well-placed bug or a cleverly exploited mathematical flaw in an encryption standard could have provided a river of intelligence for years. Consider the case of Walker spy ring, which provided the Soviets with keycards for American naval encryption machines for nearly 2 decades. This wasn't a theoretical breach, it was real and devastating. But it also serves as a blueprint for how other, still secret operations might have functioned. If a walk-in agent provided the source code for an early commercial encryption system used by a defense contractor, or if a cipher clerk in a European ally's foreign ministry was blackmailed into handing over codebooks, the resulting intelligence flow could have continued until that entire system was eventually retired, perhaps long after the individual who compromised it was gone or even forgotten. This notion forces a sobering re-examination of some of the Cold War's most perplexing intelligence failures. Why did certain Western agent networks behind the Iron Curtain seem to evaporate at the worst possible moments? The official explanation often points to a human mole like the Phantom in the CIA. But an alternative and equally plausible explanation is that their communications were compromised. A single breached encrypted radio channel used to communicate with agents could have doomed dozens of operatives. Similarly, sudden Soviet advancements in weapons technology that seemed to perfectly counter Western systems might not have been solely due to human spies like John Walker. They could have been aided by the interception of encrypted design and test data transmitted between research facilities, giving Soviet engineers a blueprint of what they needed to defeat. The most haunting possibility is that some of these breaches were so fundamental that they became structural, woven into the very fabric of Cold War history. Major geopolitical events, arms control negotiations, responses to invasions, even the strategies during the Cuban Missile Crisis were coordinated via encrypted communications. If the Soviets were reading the other side's cards in real time, it would explain certain seemingly prescient moves or stubborn negotiating positions that confused Western analysts at the time. It would mean that the West was often playing a game of poker where its opponent could see every hand it was dealt, a disadvantage so profound that it recontextualizes the entire struggle. The greatest secret of the Cold War may not be what we learned about them, but what they knew about us all along, gleaned from signals we transmitted in the absolute conviction that our secrets were safe. While the Romans pioneered the early structures of state intelligence, it was their successors in the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire who refined espionage into a true art of governance, a sophisticated and shadowy instrument of power that allowed their empire to survive for 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. Based in the magnificent paranoid city of Constantinople, the Byzantine emperors understood that their realm, a Christian fortress surrounded by persistent enemies, could not be defended by legions alone. Its survival depended on information, on knowing the intentions of the Persian Shah, the ambitions of the Bulgar Khan, or the loyalty of a general on the distant Italian frontier. To this end, they developed one of the most advanced and pervasive intelligence apparatuses the world had ever seen. Yet the full scope of its operations is one of history's most profound silences, a vast machine whose inner workings remain largely lost to us. The sheer sophistication of their system is glimpsed in the few manuals that survived, most famously the strategic guide written by the Emperor Maurus in the 6th century. It instructs generals to maintain a network of spies who could speak the enemy's language fluently and blend in seamlessly with local populations. These agents, often merchants, travelers, or even clerics, were tasked with mapping terrain, assessing morale, and counting campfires to estimate army sizes. But this was merely the tactical layer. At the highest level, the Byzantines mastered the darker arts of deception and psychological warfare. They perfected the use of double agents to feed disinformation to their foes, and they employed a corps of diplomats who were, in essence, licensed spies, trained to flatter, bribe, and eavesdrop their way through foreign courts, all while negotiating treaties. The entire Byzantine state was, in many ways, an intelligence agency with an empire attached. This leads us to the central, frustrating mystery. For an empire that so meticulously recorded its laws, its theology, and its court ceremonies, why is so little said about the secretive bureau that must have managed this vast network? Historians believe the heart of this system was an office known as the logothete of the course, a title that blandly meant accountant of the imperial post, but whose true function was almost certainly that of spymaster general. The deliberate dullness of the title was itself a brilliant piece of tradecraft, disguising a nerve center of secrets within the mundane bureaucracy of the palace. The records of this office, if they were ever kept in a centralized way, have vanished completely. We are left with only the results of their work: miraculous military victories, sudden betrayals of enemy generals, and astonishingly well-timed diplomatic coups, but not the mechanics of how they were achieved. What breathtaking secrets did their agents uncover that we will never know? The possibilities are staggering. A Byzantine spy in the court of the Sasanian Persian king might have learned of a planned invasion years in advance, allowing the empire to fortify borders and sow dissent among the king's allies. An agent in the Vatican could have provided the emperor with a detailed account of the political machinations between the Pope and the Frankish king, Charlemagne, intelligence that would have been priceless in managing the fraught relationship between Eastern and Western Christianity. The Byzantines were surrounded by existential threats from the Arab armies to the Viking ruse, and their longevity suggests their intelligence was not just good. It was often preternaturally excellent, allowing them to substitute guile for strength. Perhaps the most tantalizing unknown is the identity and methods of their most successful long-term assets. The Byzantines famously used honey traps and blackmail to compromise foreign officials, but who were the stars of this shadow war? Was there a Byzantine Motahari operating in the harem of a Fatimid caliph, a deep-cover agent who spent decades posing as a merchant in Kiev, slowly rising to become a trusted advisor to the Slavic prince? The use of cryptology was also advanced, with emperors and generals using cipher disks to encrypt messages. How many of their communications have we found but simply cannot read? their secrets locked away behind codes that modern cryptographers have yet to break. Each undecoded parchment could contain the truth behind a pivotal historical event, now lost because the cipher key died with the spymaster. The true legacy of Byzantine intelligence is not just in the secrets they kept, but in the ghosts they left behind in the historical record. Their unparalleled success created a world of shadows within the grand narrative of the medieval world. We study the treaties, the battles, and the theological disputes, but we are largely blind to the hidden wiring, the bribes that secured an alliance, the whispered rumor that started a war, the assassin's knife that removed a rival, that truly conducted the flow of power for a millennium. The lost spies of the Byzantine Empire ensured their empire's survival, but in doing so, they also ensured that the full, uncensored story of how they did it is a secret their civilization has kept perfectly for over 500 years. Even after the exposure of the Cambridge Five, a chilling suspicion refused to die within the upper echelons of British intelligence, a gnawing belief that the purge was incomplete. The official narrative had closed the book on a specific ring, but for many veteran officers and counterintelligence chiefs, the pattern of catastrophe suggested a far more terrifying reality, that at least one more highly placed Soviet mole remained buried deep within the system, a phantom whose treachery was inferred from the blood trails of blown operations and the corpses of betrayed agents, but whose identity remained just out of reach. This wasn't just paranoia. It was a conviction born from a series of inexplicable intelligence failures that continued to plague MI6 long after Philby, Burgess, and McLean had been exposed. The evidence for this unidentified traitor is a mosaic of disaster. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, British operations aimed at recruiting Soviet officials behind the Iron Curtain suffered an almost 100% failure rate. Agents were captured almost immediately after being contacted. Safe houses were raided with pinpoint precision. Perhaps the most devastating example was the fate of MI6's entire network in Albania. In Operation Valuable, a joint mission with the American CIA, teams of Albanian exiles were trained and infiltrated back into their homeland to foment rebellion against the communist regime. It was a daring plan, but it ended in a slaughter. Every single infiltration team was met by waiting security forces. Men were captured and executed en masse. For years, the failure was blamed on poor planning or bad luck, but the consistency and completeness of the disaster pointed to a far darker explanation. Someone with foreknowledge of the entire operation had betrayed it from the very beginning. This pattern of compromise inevitably triggered a series of internal investigations, the most famous of which was led by the formidable counterintelligence chief, Sir Roger Hollis. Suspicions swirled that the mole might be operating from the very top within the directorate of MI5 itself. The investigations, however, became a hall of mirrors. Officers suspected each other, files were mysteriously altered, and leads evaporated into dead ends. The hunt became so all-consuming and corrosive that it began to paralyze the service's ability to function, creating a climate of such intense mutual distrust that genuine operations were stifled for fear they would be immediately compromised. The very search for the phantom was perhaps as damaging as the mole's actions themselves, crippling morale and hamstringing British intelligence for a generation. Who could this ghost have been? The list of suspects included some of the most respected names in the service. The investigations themselves pointed fingers at senior figures, but without the concrete evidence needed for a prosecution. Was it someone who had been vetted and cleared years earlier, their loyalty never seriously questioned? Or perhaps a more cunning individual who had been turned after they were already in a position of great trust, their betrayal hidden behind a facade of impeccable service? The most disturbing theory suggests that the mole wasn't a lone wolf, but part of a second, even more carefully concealed ring that operated in parallel to the Cambridge Five, a group whose existence was so well hidden that not even Philby or Blunt knew of them. The potential damage caused by such an unknown asset is almost incalculable. Beyond the tragic loss of individual agents, think of the strategic implications. For decades, every piece of intelligence Britain collected on the Soviet Union would have been funneled through a filter controlled by the KGB. This means the entire British government's understanding of Soviet military capabilities, economic health, and political intentions, the very foundation of Cold War policy, may have been based on a carefully curated diet of half-truths and deliberate lies. Major decisions on defense spending, diplomatic strategy, and nuclear deterrence could have been subtly manipulated by an invisible hand, all while Whitehall remained convinced it was acting on solid, reliable information. The legacy of this unsolved case is a permanent wound on the history of British intelligence. It means that for all the victories celebrated and traitors caught, a fundamental question can never be truly answered. Did we ever really clean house? The possibility remains that the most successful Soviet agent of the Cold War era was not one of the famous names we know, but a ghost who retired with a full pension and a quiet commendation, their greatest achievement being a secret they guarded so perfectly that it died with them, leaving behind only the faint, unsettling echo of operations that should have succeeded but instead ended in silent disaster. Imagine for a moment the most sensitive document in the entire Western world during the height of the Cold War. It isn't a blueprint for a new missile or a list of agent names. It is a single, comprehensive plan, known by various code names over the decades, detailing exactly how NATO would defend Western Europe from a massive, overwhelming invasion by the Warsaw Pact. This document and its Soviet equivalent represented the ultimate playbook for World War III. The terrifying and persistent theory among intelligence veterans is that this crown jewel of strategic planning was not as secure as we were led to believe, and that its secrets may have been methodically stolen by a phantom spy whose success was so complete they vanished without a trace. The evidence for this profound breach is not a single defector's confession, but a pattern of curious and unsettling anomalies. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, NATO war games and strategic exercises repeatedly yielded bizarre and illogical results. Warsaw Pact forces in these simulations consistently anticipated the alliance's key defensive maneuvers. They would preemptively deploy to block the reinforcement routes through specific West German valleys, or they would concentrate their own forces precisely where NATO counterattack was supposed to land its hardest blow. This went far beyond shrewd military guesswork. It suggested an intimate familiarity with the alliance's most closely guarded contingency plans, the very scenarios that were supposed to be the West's ultimate strategic surprise. This suspicion was chillingly reinforced by the almost prescient development of Soviet weapons systems. NATO doctrine relied heavily on its technological edge to counter the Eastern Bloc's advantage in sheer numbers. Yet, time and again, new Soviet tanks, aircraft, and missiles appeared that seemed eerily tailored to negate the West's latest advancements. Their new anti-aircraft systems, for example, exhibited an uncanny understanding of the electronic countermeasures and radar signatures of next-generation NATO aircraft that were still in the testing phase. This pattern strongly suggested that Soviet engineers weren't just engaging in parallel research. They were receiving detailed technical specifications and performance data, allowing them to build their defenses specifically to defeat systems before they were even fully deployed. The potential identity of this phantom operative is a question that could only involve a vanishingly small number of individuals. Access to the complete, overarching NATO defense plan was restricted to a handful of the most senior military commanders, a few top civilian strategists at Alliance headquarters, and perhaps the highest-ranking members of the nuclear planning group. This mole would have to be someone with cosmic-level clearance, a trusted insider whose loyalty was beyond question. Some investigators have privately pointed fingers at certain charismatic, high-ranking officers from member nations who exhibited unexplained sympathies or had curious gaps in their personal histories. Others speculate about a long-term, deep-cover, illegal agent planted by the KGB decades earlier, who had patiently and meticulously built a sterling career that would eventually grant them this ultimate access. The damage such a leak would have caused is almost too vast to comprehend. It wouldn't just be the betrayal of a weapons system, it would be the compromise of the entire Western battle plan. If the Soviets possessed a detailed blueprint of NATO defensive strategy, it would have allowed them to craft their own invasion plans with devastating efficiency. They could have identified the weakest points in the alliance's layered defense, known exactly which bridges to destroy first to paralyze reinforcements, and precisely which airfields to target to grounding NATO air power. This knowledge could have shaved critical days off a Soviet advance, potentially leading to a swift military and political collapse of Western Europe before the full might of the United States could even be brought to bear. Even more terrifying is the possibility that this phantom agent had access to the procedures for the release of tactical nuclear weapons, the very cornerstone of NATO flexible response doctrine. Knowing the exact political thresholds, communication channels, and launch protocols would have given the Soviets an unimaginable advantage in the opening hours of a conflict. They could have crafted a strategy to decapitate the alliance's command and control structure, severing the link between political leaders and the military, potentially leaving NATO blind, deaf, and unable to authorize the very nuclear response that was meant to be its ultimate deterrent. This unknown spy didn't just leak documents, they may have held the keys to winning or losing a global war in the first 48 hours. This case remains officially unsolved because it is so deeply intertwined with other Cold War espionage mysteries, particularly the hunt for the mole within the CIA. It is possible they were one and the same, a single super spy operating in a position that granted access to both American and Alliance secrets. The ghost of the NATO mole endures as the most chilling kind of espionage mystery, one where the evidence is entirely circumstantial. The suspect list is a roster of the most trusted individuals, and the potential consequences are so catastrophic that the full truth may be locked away forever, a state secret too dangerous to ever admit. And that brings us to our final, and perhaps most profound, unsolved case, one that encompasses all the others. It is not the story of a single spy or a specific code, but the silent, gaping void left behind by the deliberate and systematic destruction of intelligence archives throughout history. For every secret we know, there are thousands that were deliberately erased, burned, or shredded, taking with them the complete stories of operations, the true identities of agents, and the unvarnished reality of events that shaped our world. This is the eternal mystery of what was deemed too dangerous, too embarrassing, or simply too secret to ever be written down in the first place. Consider the immense scale of this loss. Intelligence agencies, by their very nature, are paradoxically both meticulous record keepers and professional secret keepers. They generate mountains of paperwork, agent reports, intercepted messages, financial ledgers for covert operations, and damage assessments. But the ultimate fate of most of this material is not a library, it is an incinerator. The standard procedure for closing a sensitive file is its total destruction. This means that the true, complete history of any major espionage operation is almost never preserved. We are left with fragments, a decrypted message here, a memo from a director there, but the connective tissue, the candid daily cable traffic, the identities of low-level couriers and safe housekeepers, the methods of recruitment and betrayal are almost always gone forever. Our understanding is like seeing a few scattered frames from a film and trying to guess the entire plot. Some of the most significant deliberate destruction was carried out by the agencies themselves to protect their methods and their people. As we touched on earlier, the legendary Black Chambers of Europe, like Austria's Geheim Kabinettskanzlei, incinerated their archives to prevent diplomatic scandals and to keep their code-breaking techniques secret. But this practice continued into the modern era. In 1945, as World War II ended, the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA, destroyed vast quantities of its files related to agent networks in Europe, fearing they would be compromised or could endanger those who had helped them if they fell into the wrong hands. While this was done for operational security, it also permanently erased the names and deeds of countless brave individuals whose contributions we will never be able to fully acknowledge. Other archives were lost to the chaos of war or regime change. The entire intelligence apparatus of the Russian Tsars was obliterated during the revolutions of 1917. The files of the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret police, which contained details of their extensive surveillance of revolutionaries like Lenin and Stalin, their agent networks across Europe, and their infamous protocols of agent provocateurs, were seized, scattered, and largely destroyed. Imagine what those records could have told us about the early days of the Soviet state and the personalities that would go on to rule it. Similarly, the archives of the East German Stasi were not so much destroyed as they were almost comically fragmented. As the regime collapsed in 1989, officers desperately tried to shred their immense collection of surveillance files, creating over 16,000 bags of paper scraps. While dedicated teams have spent decades painstakingly reconstructing some of these documents, the vast majority remain a hopeless, tangled mess, meaning the full extent of the Stasi's web of informants and its manipulation of East German society will forever remain incomplete. The most tantalizing question is what breathtaking historical truths died with these archives. What if the complete files of the Cambridge Five existed, detailing every single document they passed and every agent they betrayed? What if we had the full, unredacted logs from the Elizabethan spymaster Sir Francis Walsingham, naming every one of his agents across Europe? We might finally know the true identity of Agent 355 from the Culper Ring. We could have a definitive answer on whether there was a second, even more deeply buried mole within British intelligence. A single surviving file could reveal that a famous historical event was actually precipitated by a brilliantly executed deception operation that has been lost to time. Our entire historical narrative is built on the documents that survived the official memos, the public treaties, the sanitized after-action reports. The raw, uncensored truth often existed only in those intelligence files, and its loss means we are often left studying the shadow of history, not the substance. This forces a humbling realization about our pursuit of these unsolved cases. We are not just searching for answers, we are searching for the answers that someone powerful did not want us to have. The destruction of an archive is the final, ultimate act of espionage, a permanent cover-up that succeeds so completely that we often do not even know what we are missing. It is a silent testament to the fact that some secrets are considered so volatile that they must be erased from existence, ensuring that the full story of how power was truly wielded in the darkest corners of history remains the most perfectly kept secret of all. And so our journey through the shadows of history reaches its end, not with a final answer, but with a humbling acknowledgement of all we may never truly know. These 25 cases are far more than just intriguing puzzles. They represent a fundamental truth about our understanding of the past. The history we study, with its clear narratives and decisive outcomes, is often just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies a vast, hidden world of secret allegiances, stolen knowledge, and brilliant deceptions that subtly, and sometimes dramatically, shape the world we live in today. The most profound legacy of these unsolved mysteries is the pattern they reveal, a consistent and troubling glimpse into the immense power of information wielded in the dark. From the unbroken codes of ancient empires to the phantom moles of the Cold War, we see that the course of human events has frequently been redirected not on the open battlefield, but in the whispers between conspirators, the silent theft of a crucial document, or the perfectly executed lie fed to an unsuspecting enemy. A single, unidentified agent could alter the outcome of a war, accelerate a technological arms race by a decade, or sow such deep distrust within a government that its policies were shaped by paranoia for a generation. We are left to wonder how many pivotal moments in our history books were actually decided by a ghost we never knew was there. This forces us to confront an unsettling reality. Our grasp of the past is inherently and perhaps permanently incomplete. For every secret we've uncovered, like the Zimmerman telegram or the Venona decrypts, countless others were either so well protected that they were never discovered, or were deliberately destroyed to protect the reputations of nations and the legacies of institutions. The full story of human history is one where key chapters are missing, ripped out by the very people who wrote them. We are left to piece together the narrative from the fragments that remain, always aware that the most compelling truths might be lost forever, existing now only as echoes in the empty spaces between the facts we can prove. Yet, this uncertainty is not a cause for frustration but for endless fascination. It invites us to look at the past not as a closed book, but as an active crime scene, where new evidence can still come to light and old assumptions can be overturned with a single discovery in a dusty archive. It encourages a more critical eye, a willingness to question the official story and to consider the hidden currents that move beneath the surface of great events. These mysteries remind us that history is not just about the kings and generals, but also about the cook who overheard a plot, the telegraph clerk who altered a message, and the idealist who leaked the truth, their names erased by the secrecy their work required. Now we turn the investigation over to you. Which of these shadowy figures and enigmatic events captures your imagination the most? Does the identity of the elusive Agent 355 keep you awake at night? Or are you convinced there's a missing piece to the puzzle of the Cambridge Five that could rewrite everything? Perhaps you have a theory about what really happened to those lost atomic secrets, or who the phantom mole within NATO might have been. The conversation doesn't end here. History is a dialogue, and your voice is a part of it. Share your thoughts and your own theories in the comments below. Let's continue to unravel these mysteries together, because sometimes the most important discoveries are made not by experts in archives, but by curious minds